So we've been discussing the issue of tzedakah, a very important theme, obviously. Again, the Gemara here says that this is the first entry of last week's Mar Makomos. We should have new Mar Makomos. Did they come or not? I sent them to Sheila, but she might be traveling, I understand. Were new Mar Makomos sent out?
Well, Rabbi, I got some new
they're
Mar Makomos,
attached.
but
The
they seem to
source
be missing
sheet
the
is
first
attached
page.
to the email, Rabbi. It's a source sheet attached.
Is it the one from last week or a new one?
Rabbi, I'll be honest with you. I'm on my iPhone. I didn't open it. I don't
Rabbi,
wanna, if they ask someone to
Okay.
click it.
Rabbi, I have a new Mar Makomos from today's email, but it seems to be missing the first page. It doesn't have the usual your name at the top.
Yeah. Okay, so you have the new ones. So let's go to the old ones first. That's my mistake. That was my mistake. Okay. Anyway, the Gemara says in Bava Basra, we'll go to the last week's, hopefully you still have. Bava Basra Chesam Beis. The Gemara says that when you collect tzedakah, you require two people to collect. Right? You can't have a single person collecting tzedakah. The Gemara says, why? Because you need two people. Why? So the Gemara says, because, I'm going to skip a little bit because we did this last week, but let me get back to it. So the Gemara says, why? Because it's srara. Srara means power. In other words, it's an exercise of authority. And therefore, you need two people. One person is not trusted to exercise power by himself. The Gemara says, Maisra Rusa, in what respect is this power? We're talking just about a Gabai Tzedakah. Says the Gemara, Dom Rav Nachum, Dom Rabba Baravua, Shememashkinin al Tzedakah Filo Erev Shabbos. Because you can enforce the obligation to give tzedakah. You can even go into a person's home, Erev Shabbos, and confiscate what he owes to tzedakah. Says the Gemara, Eini, how could that be? Baksiv, Pasuk in Yirmiyah, Pakarati al Kolo Chatzav, where Baruch Shalom says that he detests when people pressure each other, and he will protect, those who are the objects of pressure, upakadati, meaning I will, visit my hashgacha, my divine providence. I'll get involved, in other words. Al kolo chata, says the Gemara, Rabbi Yitzchak bar Shmuel bar Marta, Mishmei Derav, afilo al gabai tzedakah, that this means even people doing good things, but if they do it in the wrong way, if they pressure, that is not acceptable. Says the Gemara, lo kasher, hada amid, hada lo amid. If the person has the wherewithal, that there's no excuse, that he's evading his responsibility, that's not called pressure. That's called, enabling him to do the right thing, we'll call it. If the person is not, doesn't have funds that justify the pressure, so then the Rabban Shalom says, "Pakadati al kolo chatzav," that I will protect that person. Okay. Then the Gemara says, like the story that Rava enforced the collection of tzedakah against Rav Nassan bar Ami to the tune of 400 zuz, a significant amount. The ksuva that we write is 200 zuz. So you can imagine 400 zuz is a substantial amount. Either way, this Gemara seems to say that there's kviya b'tzedakah. And what bothered the Bali Tosas was, how could there be kviya b'tzedakah? After all, the Torah says about tzedakah that if you give it, you're supposed to give it, pasach tiftach es yadcha, nason titein lo, and then the Torah says, leman yivarechecha Hashem elokecha, in order that the Rabbanu Shalom will bless you. So the Gemara, Tosa says that is a mitzvah saseh, right? It's a positive commandment, Shema ton schar b'tzeidah, where the Torah itself delineates what the punishment or reward will be, and therefore the rules should be ein bezdin shalmata muzharin alaha, and therefore the earthly bezdin has no business meting out punishment, because basically it's not This is between the Avaryan, the transgressor, and the Rabbanu Shalom. The Rabbanu Shalom told him what's going to happen. You don't need Bezin to intervene here. So why is it that in tzedakah there's kfiyah, there is a coercion, if tzedakah is under that rubric? So what we saw in Tosas was several answers. Two answers which basically say, this Gemara seems to say there's kfiyah in the collection of tzedakah. It's misleading. It's not really kfiyah of tzedakah. It's either verbal pressure, meaning I'm, trying to harass you a little bit, but I'm not actually confiscating your money. I'm just, pressuring you. I call you up every night. No, where's your pledge? Not very nice. A lot of pressure. That's not coercion, right? That's one answer. The other answer is we're not talking about the mitzvah of tzedakah in our Gemara. We're talking about a separate levy or a separate commitment made by members of the community beyond their obligation to tzedakah according to the mitzvah saseh. And therefore, it's not under the rubric of mitzvah saseh Shema and schar b'tzedakah. Those are the first two answers of Tosas. In other words, when the Gemara here says that there's kfiyah, don't take it so seriously. We mean it in a kind of colloquial way, but we don't mean it in a really substantive way. Another answer Tosas gives is, when the Gemara says in Chulin that there's no kfiyah in a mitzvah shemat and skara b'tzeda, maybe all it means is that it's up to Bezin whether they want to get involved or not. Or maybe all it means is that they don't mete out punishment, but it doesn't mean they can't coerce the payment. In other words, what our Gemara is saying is in line still with the rule of the Gemara in Chulin. However, the middle answer that Tosas gives, answer number 3, is the intriguing one. That's where Tosas says that if there was only a mitzvah saseh, if there was only a positive commandment to give tzedakah, then there would be no kfiyah, there would be no coercion, because it's a mitzvah saseh, shemat and schar b'tzedakah. However, since there's a lo saseh, there's a negative commandment in addition to the positive commandment, so that is what tips the scales. That's what determines that there is kfiyah. But what Tosas does not explain is why, what difference to make whether the violation is a positive or a negative commandment, right? If there's such a rule, then the rule should stand. And if there's no such rule, then there's no issue. Then it goes either way. But what does that have to do with whether it's a positive or negative or both? What does that have to do with anything? So what I was trying to explain last week was based on the position of the Ritva and the Ra'ah and the Radvaz, all of whom give a different answer to this question. The answer they give is really important. What they say is, if you were to look at tzedakah only as a mitzvah, right, in the same way that we have other mitzvahs, blow shofar, sin sukkah, take the daled minim, right? There are many mitzvahs. So if it were that kind of a mitzvah, then there would be no kfiyah, because of the principle of mitzvah say shemat and schar b'tzeda and bezin shalmata muzharin allow. However, says the Ra'ah and the Ritva and the Radvaz, tzedakah is different, because what really triggers the obligation is machsoram shelo aniyim, the fact that the aniyim are hurting and they're in need. And the Radvaz goes further and says, in some respects, you owe it to the ani. It's almost like he is the Baal Chov, he's the Malveh, and you're the Loveh. It's almost like you borrowed money from him and you have to repay him. And therefore, since it's a monetary obligation, it has nothing to do with mitzvah saseh shazman shemat and schar b'tzeda. It's a chiyuv mamon, and as a chiyuv mamon, right? There's always the obligation not only to pay but to enforce payment. It's like priyas Baal Chov mitzvah, right? Which is, if A borrows money from B, then he's obligated to repay him. There's one view in the Gemara that's based on the principle of priyas Baal Chov mitzvah. But everybody understands that is a monetary mitzvah, and a monetary obligation is something that is always subject to enforcement. So
Rabbi,
that's the view of the, one second, that's the view of the Radvaz, of the Ra'ah, the mitzvah. Now, of course, when you take a step back and you think about it, it's a very shocking, perspective. It sounds like, we are, promoting socialism or, communism. Like, what's yours is mine, what mine is yours. It's what does that mean that an ani has the right to demand, that he be supported? But I think we can understand this a little better, when we think about certain other issues. For example, the Gemara says in Masechet Shabbos, and then I'll take the question, Daf Kufnin base, that poverty, oni, is a galgala choser, which means, it goes in cycles. At some point or another, every family is going to need assistance. At a different point, every family is going to be in a position to assist. So that's what the Gemara says, the Gala Choser. Now, why did the Gemara tell us that? So, of course, you could explain it very minimally. If you're obligated to give tzedakah, and many people, when they give it, it's very begrudging. They feel, listen, I worked for my hard-earned, material wealth. And, for me to just give it up and give it away, it's difficult. So on one level, the Gemara says in Shabbos, you should know that, don't feel badly when you give away your money, just like it's a galgala choser. One day your descendants, will benefit from the institution of tzedakah. Or maybe you got to where you got to because your ancestors, benefited, from this chesed. However, one could take it a giant step further, and that is to say that it's not just you shouldn't feel badly or you should understand the basis of tzedakah. What we're saying is more than that. It's almost like tzedakah is like an open-ended, two-sided fund. What we're really saying is, on some level, not only should you not, feel begrudging about giving tzedakah, because everybody benefits from the halachas, very philanthropic, perspective or orientation, but it's more than that. It's on some level, you have to give tzedakah because at some point you either did or will or both, benefit, from tzedakah. And therefore keeping, the tzedakah fund, flowing freely, is in everybody's best interest. Therefore, not only don't be begrudging, but in some respects, you're just paying back into the system, what you have already and what you will in the future get from the system.
This is very interesting. There's a principle of Kol Yisrael Arayim Zebazeh. This principle has been used by the secular Jewish community to extract money from people. This principle is not in the Gemara precisely applied to money, and its distribution is applied to mitzvos that each one of us. So, it's strange that what I'm trying to say is that apparently there's no obligation of a financial kind. Why is not the mitzvah described as one of the instances of the general category of Kol Yisrael Arayim Zebazeh?
Right, I think it's a great point. I mean, again, the fact that Kol Yisrael Arayim Zebazeh, the fact we use it in mitzvahs, you're right, like it's Kiddush.
That's what that the Gemara uses it precisely with respect to mitzvahs.
Right, Yatzamotzi.
Yes, yeah.
Right, the Gemara says that if you, the Gemara in Rosh Hashanah says if you make Kiddush and you already made a bracha, you can make another bracha and it wouldn't be considered a bracha levatala because, the bracha that you're making on behalf of your neighbor, right, it is Kol Yisrael Arayim Zebazeh. So what I would say is, you're right, the Gemara doesn't use it, but of course, the original meaning of the word Arev
I'll call you back.
is guarantor. And
the guarantor is interpreted now in terms of fulfillment of the mitzvahs of Torah.
No, but I'm saying the original term arev, which appears in the Mishnah
was
in a financial context.
in the material wealth.
Like if a person's, says Omer leisha, Omer tain mana leploni v'akadosh anilach. The Gemara says mekudeshes midin arev, right? Meaning, and the Gemara says in the end of Bava Basra that that a guarantor on a loan is obligated. Of course, you have to go to the to the debtor first. Ein nifrain mina arev tchila. But if Ruvain lends money to Shimon, and Levi volunteers to be a guarantor for Shimon that he will repay his loan, and Shimon defaults on the loan, then that's what an arev is. That's what a guarantor is. So I think when the Torah uses
generally, but I was surprised.
No, you're right. I'm agreeing with you. When the Gemara uses the expression about mitzvahs, I think it's very telling, meaning it's true. From that alone, you wouldn't know that this would ever have financial repercussions when you don't have an explicit commitment, which is what you're saying.
Exactly.
But I think it's what you're saying is very much very it's a very insightful comment. But what I do still think is that why do they use a phrase regarding mitzvos that has such financial repercussions? And I think that the answer is because if I'm a guarantor for him in mitzvos, even in Yoredeya and Isurim, in what otherwise would be a bracha levatala, right? Then the affinity between us is obviously strong enough, that it might have financial repercussions too. It's not called arev, in that respect. But what I'm talking about, which is a kind of galgala choser, or what the Ritva and the Ra'ah and the Radvaz call, it's like the ani is the balchov of the ashir. It's very remarkable. I'm just trying to explain it in context. I also don't want to get too carried away with it because I think, it's not. It has limited significance. People own their money. Let me make it clear that the Torah's system is not socialistic and it's not communistic. I mean, you own the money that you earned, in the sense that it doesn't belong to the community. Bezdin can confiscate it, hefker bezdin hefker, but that is through an initiative, and only in some sort of justified circumstance. All things being equal, if I buy something or I have money and you take it from me, you're a gazlan, you're a thief. And if you take it forcibly, you're a robber. And half of the kosher mishpat is about protecting the rights of owners because it's not community property. Having said that, at the same time, the obligation to give tzedakah is about, is not just like, if you want to. It's not lifnim b'shuras hadin. It is, but it's not. It's lifnim b'shuras hadin, but it's a category of law, and it's an obligation. And that's what the Ritva and the Ra'ah, that's what they're saying. They're saying it's what kind of, it's almost like you owe him. Wow, I owe him? I never met him before. Well, I'm just trying to explain with Galgala Choser, not all your money, but the obligation to be philanthropic, is based not only on not being begrudging because at some point or another it'll be helpful to you and your family, or will be and was, but more than that, it's there's a little bit of balchov and lova here, but it goes in both directions. Right?
So Rabbi, it seems that to me this is kind of an ongoing chiyuv that people have towards the aniyim, in the same way that you have to leave a portion of your field, of your crop, to the poor.
Yeah.
So
well, leket shikha upeya, which is what you're talking about, these are called matnos aniyim, gifts to the poor. It is a form of, it's not exactly tzedakah, but it's a form of tzedakah. That's true. That's an Eretz Yisrael in the context of produce, and tzedakah is more, financial, and it applies, whether you're in Eretz Yisrael or in Chutz La'aretz or in the diaspora, but they are both forms of tzedakah. That's true.
But and so the point, the point really is that first of all, the societies were agrarian, so everything revolved around. Whereas money today, you know,
You're right, but I'm saying Leket Shikhupe, just remember, Leket Shikhupe isn't the whole story of tzedakah, and then to be explained by the agrarian economy, because it only applies, Leket Shikhupe only apply in Kedushas Haaretz, they only apply in Eretz Yisrael. But there always was, and remember, you know, these are psukim in the Torah that you have to give tzedakah. So as are the psukim about Leket Shikhupe, some of them are in Parshas Kedoshim that we just read last week. But the psukim about tzedakah are in Parshas Re'eh and Bahar, especially Re'eh, and they're, you know, they're contemporaneous, you know, with the agrarian part. So it's not, you know, it's not one or the other, it's both. And, you know, the idea is if you live in Eretz Yisrael, so the land of Israel has like special sanctity, you know, and being generous to your Jewish, you know, compatriot, you know, your brother, you know, in Eretz Yisrael, and expressing that through Tvuas Haaretz has, you know, a particular added significance. That's what, you know, Matnos Aniyim, whether it's Meiser Ani or Leket or Shikha or Peah, the corner of the field, in other words, the collection of the you know, of the crops that you leave behind. That's what it's all about. But it's not the full story of tzedakah. In addition, there is just, you know, a more effective and universal, meaning even outside of Eretz Yisrael, obligation to give a portion, you know, if you're in a position to help, and we'll see in a moment, even if you're not, you know, to help your fellow Jew financially.
Rabbi, I wanted to ask
money,
you,
coins, it means, you know.
so may I, Rabbi, let's take a scenario, the regular thing. A man takes a loan from somebody.
Yeah.
And when he pays it back, there is Mekayim a mitzvah of some sort by paying back, and does he
Priyas
get?
Balchov mitzvah, we say.
I'm sorry?
The expression in the Gemara is that Priyas Balchov the mitzvah.
Now, with the loan, the agreement of the loan, there is what you mentioned before, Arev. Somebody with an Arev that in case the loan will not be paid, then the Arev...
There doesn't have to be an Arev, but there can be an Arev.
Yeah. Suppose there is an Arev, who is the... And he pays the debt that other guy did not pay. And
right.
the debt was paid. Question, who wins, so to speak? Who wins the mitzvah? Is it the Orev, or is it the man who owes the money, who owed the money?
Well, it can't be the man who owed the money because he didn't pay in the end, unless he pays back the Orev, I guess, at some point, right?
Yeah.
I mean, he didn't do it. He didn't take care of his responsibility. He's lucky. He was, I guess, you know, fortunate for the Malva, you know, that there was an Arev who did discharge his responsibility. But it would be impossible for the Lova to get credit for something he didn't do, right?
But the Arev assumed some kind of a responsibility on his behalf because he's not able to pay or whatever it is.
Right. So that's all very legal, but I wouldn't give credit to the Lova. I'd give credit to the Arev.
Okay.
You know, the Arev, I don't want to go into the details now, but there's a big legal discussion whether a guarantor, an Arev, is considered like a second Lova or no. It's just the category.
You learned that a few years ago.
That's a big issue.
You learned that a few years ago.
Well, it comes up in Kiddushin, I mentioned before. Let's say a person says, Tain mana leploni v'akadesh ani lach. The woman says to the man, instead of giving me a pruta, right, do me a favor, give the money to someone else at my behest. So the Gemara says, Mekudeshes midin arev. Because like an arev, the very fact that she, you know, the very fact that he, the husband, or the would-be husband, you know, agreed based on her commitment, right, to give money, you know, that constitutes a kind of hana.
But isn't there a question that the Hanor also has to have a concrete aspect? Pure Hanor without a concrete aspect, it's some problem in the Kedusha.
Well,
No,
in the Kedushin, you mean?
yeah.
No,
words,
I mean, that's a big debate.
Just to promise her the Hanor of somebody else's thing is not really a Kedushin.
Well, that's a big debate. But let's say, the Gemara has other cases. I mean, not everybody agrees about that. But let's say I say, Schok lefanai. Tell me a good joke.
It's got to be worth a proof of the joke.
Right? You pay for a comedian when you go to... So Schok lefanai might work. Or Adaber alayich l'shilton. I'll use my influence. I'll go to the governor. I'll say a good word for you. Right? You're not getting any concrete.
But when it says do Hanor for this person on my behalf, that I think we learned is a questionable Kedushin. Do something that gives Hanor.
Yeah, I mean, the exact line.
Yeah,
I just don't want to get into that right now. But what I'm saying is the general idea that you can be Mekadesh Bahana has very strong roots. Anyways,
we're going back to fundamentals. Why are we so seem to be concerned that the Torah is not, which it's not, anywhere near capitalistic in its outlook? I mean,
it's neither capitalistic nor socialistic nor communistic.
Well, it's probably quasi-pure social. The socialism we know today is nonsense. I mean, the Torah is socialism.
No, I don't think. I mean, the Torah has a very strong social justice.
Which is what the true socialism is supposed to be. This nonsense of the past 200 years is just, a way to dictate. To take, as you said, take money from A and give it to B. Right.
No, there are many exceptions and there are many situations where that happens. But all I'm saying is that in the base, like the core of things, the very concept of ownership is such a powerful idea in the halacha, in terms of gezel, in terms of bailus.
No better example than Ono as an example of the fact.
Ono is not socialism. So
but it definitely is not capitalism. The idea that
it's not unfettered.
I'm not forcing you to buy it. I can charge you whatever.
No, right. You're right. I mean, in the sense that there are restraints
exactly
on entrepreneurial. It's not like
didn't Rabbi make a ruling?
It's not it's not a free market economy. Put it that way.
Didn't Rabbi make a ruling to prevent the price gouging or something under certain circumstances?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it was a lot of what was his name? Ralph Nader-esque. Is he still alive, Ralph Nader?
No, I don't think so.
So there was a lot of takanos and a lot of but I wouldn't say it isn't capitalist. I would say that it's not unrestrained free market, capitalism. But what it is there's a very strong core principle of ownership and private ownership.
And social justice.
And social justice, stand side by side. By the way, I mean, it's a Shemitah year. Again, we're getting off the topic a little bit. That's fine. It's a Shemitah year, correct? So, what is the Shemitah year? I mean, you're not supposed to. I mean, two things: the Shemitah Ksafim in the end of the year. Shemitah Ksafim is a very remarkable halacha. That's debt forgiveness, right? I know they're pushing Biden now that he should, forgive all the student loans, right?
Yeah.
But every 7 years, all things being equal, when you have a regular loan, there's supposed to be debt forgiveness. That's a very remarkable thing.
Until Hillel came around.
Until Prisbal, correct. And the Prisbal is, a b'diavad, but it works and it's important because otherwise, other things would go out. But that's number one. But think about Shemitah itself. What is Shemitah? Shemitah's karka. Means you're not allowed to plant, you're not allowed to prune, you're not allowed to harvest.
You don't work. You don't.
Not only that. At a certain point, there's a concept of biur, which means you have to, be mafkir, or at least you can't eat, the peiros of your own property. There's an isur schora. You're not allowed to treat peiros shvius as a commercial, entrepreneurial. Property, meaning there are all these restrictions that take place in the Shemitah year, and
sort of levels the playing field for a year.
So is it about leveling the playing field? Maybe, for sure. It's the Shemitah Sufim certainly is, and Yovel, I think, is a little bit about sort of a reset. It's a
This
reset.
could be regarded as an aspect of the redistribution of wealth.
I don't think it's
No, not
I don't think it's
redistributing.
redistribution. What I think is every 7 years, Klal Yisrael has to acknowledge that ownership has its limits.
It goes back to the original division of the tribes.
Yes. No, that's Yovel. Yovel does.
But,
Well,
but
in some part, sure.
as
Yeah,
we found out,
But Shemitah is not that. Shemitah is that it goes back to the 14 years where there was collective ownership of Klal Yisrael, and there wasn't yet individual ownership. So there is individual ownership even in the Shemitah year, but we don't exercise or demonstrate that ownership. So the idea of not planting and the idea of not harvesting and the idea of not treating, the produce as if it's, a commercial asset, and you can't, sell it in a business-like manner. All of that is a way of 1 year of 7, right? Suppressing, right, the demonstrative ownership part that you have, even though you remain the owner. And I think that that's an interesting balance. It's not about redistribution at all, frankly. I don't think it is. It's not at all.
Not entirely.
It's about muting.
There is a phase of socialism and there's a phase of capitalism. It's not pure either one.
Right. But what I would say is that it's not because we're socialistic. It's because, especially in Eretz Yisrael and Kedusha Sakarka, the collectivity of Klal Yisrael is an important principle. It's not so much for social justice reasons as much as it is for, accentuating that all of Eretz Yisrael belongs to all of Klal Yisrael.
but isn't there some relationship to the Shavas of Shabbos to the Shavas of Shemitah?
No, of course. So the Shavs, what I think in the same way, I mean, every 7 days you abstain from economic activity and
Which
creative
also
activity.
has a natural positive aspect to human condition. And is
Right.
it possible that Shemitah has a positive aspect to agricultural? As
It
we
does,
know,
but I think
crop rotation has positive.
I think that's true, and I think it's much, much more than that. I think it's the value of the humility and the acknowledgement that it's God's land, that it belongs to Klal Yisrael as a whole, that you are an owner, and there's a certain gratitude.
Low.
Yeah. So that's what I think it is. Anyways, why are we talking about this? Yeah, because we're talking about whether or not tzedakah implies capitalism or socialism. The answer is there is ownership and there's also social justice. There is ownership and there's also altruism and philanthropy. And there is ownership, otherwise none of this would apply. But in the end of the day, there's v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, and there's a recognition that every single member of the Jewish community is a brother, is a family member, and that's very crucial. So having said that, I think that's what the Re means too. The Re said that the reason that we don't apply the principle of mitzvah Shema and Zchor b'Tzeidah in this case is because there's also a lav here. There's not only a mitzvah saseh, there's also a lav. What does that do with anything? What is that? Well, who cares if there's an aseh or a lav? So my answer is the following. If you look carefully at the aseh and the lav of tzedakah, I believe they really accentuate 2 aspects of the mitzvah of tzedakah. The aseh represents largesse, meaning the initiating an act of kindness. And it's very much, like other mitzvahs aseh. And that the language that the Torah uses highlights that. What does the Torah say about tzedakah, the mitzvah say? Nason titein, double give.
Mhm.
Give acknowledges that you're the giver, right? And pasoach tiftach es yadcha, open up your hand. Initiating, an act of kindness. But what are the losas says? Lo ta'ametzas levavcha, v'lo tikpotzas yadcha. Lo ta'ametz levavcha means do not harden your heart. Lo tikpon tasyadecha, do not withdraw your hand. What do they both imply? They both imply that you have an obligation and you shouldn't, you shouldn't negate, you shouldn't retract the obligation. It's exactly the opposite of the mitzvah say. It's not like the asay and the lav are two sides of the same coin. The asay emphasizes that you are taking initiative, even though there is, you're seeking out the ani. Pasach tiftach nasam tite. Lo ta'ametz and lo tikbots sounds like, you're in the middle of giving and you shouldn't stop. How did you get to be in the middle of giving?
Well, you can treat it as a one mitzvah. Both the aseh and the lo ta'aseh could be.
You could, but I don't believe that the language of the Torah implies that. So now take a look at the Rambam for a minute. Look at the Rambam in Perek Zayin, Hilchos Matnas Aniyim, Halacha Aleph and Beis. This is on the Mar Makomos, not this week's yet, but last week's on page 3. Listen to the different language that the Rambam uses. In Perek Zayin Halacha Aleph, he says, Mitzvah Haseh, it's a positive command. Litain tzedakah la'aniyim, to give tzedakah to the poor. Kifima shera'ui la'ani, what the ani needs. Im ha'isayad anosei masegas, assuming that the donor, the philanthropist, is able to afford it. That's also important, right? Shenemar pasach tiftach es yadcha lo, v'nemar v'achzakta bo, you should support him. Ger v'toshav v'chai imach. V'nemar, third pasuk, v'chei achicha imach. So what's fascinating about this pasuk is the Rambam counts a mitzvah say, but one of the psukim that he quotes based on the Gemara is v'achzakta bo ger v'toshav. What's a ger v'toshav? What's a ger toshav? It's a non-Jew.
A stranger.
Yeah.
One who agrees to keep the mitzvahs.
Correct. Who agrees to keep, not to be open about a zara, and he accepts upon himself Sheva mitzvah b'nei Noach, etc. It sounds like he's included in the mitzvah say of tzedakah. Now look at halacha base.
How is the mitzvah say of tzedakah? Noach.
Say again?
How is the mitzvah tzedakah one of the Sheva mitzvahs b'nei Noach?
Well, it's not Shemitah b'nei Noach, it's Ger Toshav, which is a little bit different than Ben Noach. It's not that Shemitah b'nei Noach is a different story. Shemitah b'nei Noach is what mitzvos are b'nei Noach, not Ger Toshav, but b'nei Noach, obligated to each other.
But a Ger Toshav is obligated to keep Sheva mitzvahs b'nei Noach. He's not necessarily obligated to keep the 613 mitzvahs. He's not obligated at all.
No, fine. But what we're talking about here is something quite different. We're talking about whether a Jew can fulfill his tzedakah obligation by giving to a ger toshav, not whether a ger toshav or a ben noach have an obligation.
Okay.
Right?
Right.
I'm talking about the destination. Like, who are you giving your tzedakah money to? To the Fifth Avenue Synagogue? To your Jewish neighbor?
Doesn't Gemara go through this whole issue about whether you should give something to a ger toshav versus, we learned that a few years ago.
No, so we have
a hierarchy of who we should give things to, like food or things of that nature.
Oh, okay, yeah, these are very important issues, right? The Gemara says
the same thing apply.
No, so one second. The Gemara says in Gittin and Daf Samach Amud Aleph, Mefarnesin Aniye Akum Im Aniye Yisrael Mipnei Darkei Shalom.
Right, that's the one I'm talking about. Yeah.
So now, but notice the language of the Gemara, and that's how it's codified, by the way. If you look at the Ramban codifies that particular halacha in two places. One in Hilchos Matnas Aniyim, where it talks about Inyanei Tzedakah, which you expect, but also in Hilchos Malachim. And he actually says it in slightly different ways, but that's not for now. But if you pay attention to the language of that, since you're asking about it, that aphorism, it's Mefarnesin Aniye Akum Im, together with Aniye Yisrael. Aniye Akum means Ovdei Avodah Zarah, not Bnei Noach, not Ger Toshav. Even idol worshippers, if they're together and they're sticking out their hand together, right? Mishum Darkei Shalom. So
Which is not a moral issue, by the way, not a moral principle, but a practical, pragmatic principle.
So,
Are we talking
in
Eretz
Hilchos
Yisrael
Matnas,
or outside of
Rabbi Ross,
It's a different concept than on
I
Yisrael.
understand, but that's I only alluded to it before, but you're not letting me get away with it. So I'm gonna add two more lines. In Hilchos Matnos Aniyim, you're so right. The language, the Mefarnas and Aniyah Yakum Aniyah Yisromim, they darkei shalom usually means is a pragmatic, meaning you want to keep the peace. You want
But that would be outside of Eretz Yisrael, no? In other words, you live amongst the
let me finish. One thing at a time. One second.
Huh?
One thing at a time. Just 1 sec. So, if you look at Hilchos Matnas Aniyim, it's perfectly clear. The Rambam codifies it exactly that way. Okay. However, in Hilchos Malachim, when the Rambam quotes exactly the same halacha, there he adds a different pasuk. And he says, Diracheha darchei noam v'chol nesivoseha shalom.
So that's what you are saying. Mishum darchei
So that's a
shalom.
little bit more edifying. That's not just, pragmatic. Mishum darchei shalom. It's Diracheha darchei noam v'chol nesivoseha. That already implies a certain humaneness.
Would that make it a moral principle, darchei noam?
Yeah, I think so. But anyways, that's a din, that's an
very
extra
interesting.
chiyuv. That's not din doraisa, right? It's miptei darkei shalom, whatever it's based on. But the pasuk v'hechsakta bo ger v'toshav v'chayimach that Rambam is quoting, and by the way, he quotes it in Sefer Mitzvos too. We'll see it in just a moment. That is midoraisa. That's not miptei darkei shalom. So that means you can send your tzedakah money. I think the Minchas Chinuch, if I recall correctly, also makes this comment. He says, if you look carefully at the Chinuch and the Rambam, it seems like you could fulfill your biblical obligation of tzedakah by sending to a ger toshav, not to a regular benoach, and not to an oved kochavim. You may have obligations to them too, mipnei darkei shalom, but that's not tzedakah. That's not the ikar din of tzedakah. So that's number one. But now look for a minute at halacha base. Halacha base, the Rambam is discussing a whole different scenario. Instead of what you are obligated to initiate, the Rambam says, "V'chol haroa ani mevakesh." If you encounter a demanding ani, right? We're not talking about, it's getting close to the end of the year. I have to fulfill my tzedakah obligations. Where should I send checks? Somebody knocks on your door, or he accosts you in the street, or whatever. He sends you a letter, right? He initiates. But then the Rambam says, the halim einov mimenu, and he ignores him. He rejects him by ignoring him. So I think this is brilliant. I mean, these extra words that the Rambam adds are not in the Gemara necessarily, but I think they are implicit in the Psukim. If I tell you don't harden your heart, it sounds like you are already in a position, where you've encountered, somebody who has needs and you're ignoring him. So you're hardening your heart. If you're sitting home and you're not giving tzedakah, you're not hardening your heart, right? You're not doing patzoach tiftach or nason tite, but you're also not involved in being ma'ametz lebavcha or tik. What does tik potz yadcha mean? It means don't withdraw your hand. What do you mean withdraw your hand? It sounds like your hand is out. You're giving, and right before he takes it, you snatch it away. Right? That's the image, right? I think the Rambam. 1 second. I think the Rambam read these psukim in Parshas Re'eh. He noted the, tremendous contrast between the donor initiative, focus of the mitzvah saseh, and the ki'ilu, there's already a confrontation and an expectation, on part of the ani and a reliance. And that's being kind of disappointed, or the initiative of removing that. not the initiative of extending it, is taking place by the Ashir. He's withdrawing his hand after having stretched it and extended it. He is hardening his heart, already after having been, confronted. And the Rambam understood that it must be at the context as confrontation. What's that?
After he made a commitment, he sort of withdrew his commitment.
Yeah, or whether maybe he didn't make the commitment, but the point is that there's an encounter. There's already a relationship between these people.
Is it really that, or is it possible that he fulfilled all his stock obligations already, but he still has the obligation of Kiddush Hashem, Sisa Yasher Tov, Kadoshim to you?
No, this is Hilchos. This is a lav of Hilchos Tzedakah for the Rambam.
But isn't that different when you make a neder? You're not supposed to break it. Doesn't that go beyond?
We're not talking about the Nedarim right now. We're not talking about.
No. Would you make a pledge? When you make a pledge, isn't that
forget
like
about pledges? We're not talking about pledges right now. Last week we spoke about pledges. That's midrash. That's a different category. I mean, I'm not refusing to speak about it. I'm saying this is not the topic. The topic right now is your obligation to give tzedakah without verbal.
No, the obligation is not unlimited. Person is not supposed to give more than a certain percentage of his wealth.
Oh, he doesn't have to give more than a certain percentage. No one says that it's unlimited.
Sometimes the Gemara says he shouldn't do it at all because he'll be an ani himself.
Yeah.
Well, and there's
great
20%.
question. So this is those are right. We'll get to that in a minute. But either way, we're not talking about neder, and we're not talking about exceeding the limits. Don't worry. He's still got enough, he's got room in his, flexible spending, account, for this. So the point is that you could see how the Rambam read the Psukim and depicted, the circumstances of the Asay and the Lav in such opposite ways. So you asked me what about an Ani himself? Right? Is an ani obligated to
give tzedakah? From where? If he's an ani, where is he going?
Right, that's the question. Do you have to give money like on wedding money? Like where are your parents give you money? Do you have to give on that? Right? But wouldn't that be under the category?
Yeah, that's a question of Meiser and things like that. But okay, so look at the Rambam in Perek Zayin Halacha Hey. Right? Boha ani v'shal de machsora. The ani comes and he asks. De machsora means the amount that he's missing, like what's missing in his life. The ein yada no say maseges, very legitimate. Sometimes, as you correctly point out, sometimes he can't afford it, or sometimes the amount that the ani needs is so enormous that he can't afford it. So no say lo. The halacha is very reasonable. You're right. You have to give, you have to be careful for your own family as well. No sin lo kafiyat sagas yado. You don't give more than you can give. The kama, right? How much? Ad chamishis nechasav mitzvah amuvkar. The top line is 20%. Achad miasar b'nifsei beinoni 10%. Pachos mikan, right? La'olam le'yimana atzma mishlishas hashekel b'shana. The lowest you could give is like a third of a shekel each year. But then listen to the last line of the Rambam. Even if he's on the rolls and he's getting tzedakah, he's supposed to give tzedakah. But this is referring to the obligation to give. Look now for a moment at the very end of these Marmakomos, not the new Marmakomos. You'll see I have Sefer Mitzvos LaRambam. There's some added reinforcement and a little bit of additional information when you put together the Rambam's comments in Hilchos Tzedakah, which is Hilchos Matnas Aniyim, and his, succinct encapsulation of the mitzvah of the Asay and the Lav of Tzedakah in Sefer Mitzvos. So look at the mitzvah Asay. Everybody have this? Sefer Mitzvah Rambam mitzvah Asay Kuf Tzadi Hey. Rambam says, a mitzvah Kuf Tzadi Hey, 195th Asay, Shetzivanu lasos tzedakah, to give tzedakah, ulechaze kachalashim, to support the weak, the needy, uleharchiv aleim, right? Interesting language. To give them some breathing, space. Says the Rambam, there are different psukim in the Torah that express this. Omar Yisala, Pasach Tiftachas Yadcha, double open up your hand. Omar Vehechsakta Bo Ger V'Toshav, remember, that's the one with the Ger Toshav. And also says V'cheachicha Imach, 3 psukim. V'kavona be'elo al Lushonos Kulamach, says the Rambam, even though there are 3 psukim, they have one intent. Vihi Shenazor Aniyenu, we should assist our impoverished. Unechaz came they sipukam, it probably should say, the amount that they need. We should strengthen them. They sipukam. He says, these laws are fleshed out all over the place. That's why we're doing it here, because we're doing it the first. Rubam biksuvos, uba babasra. That's our Gemaras. Uba Kabbalah. We have a Masorah. Interesting that it's a Masorah. Shafilu ani hamisparnes minat staka. Even an ani who's getting assistance, chai b'mitzvazu, klomar hatstaka. Im lemishamanta himano, im ledomalo, afilu b'davar mut. Whether maybe there's somebody worse off than him or somebody equal to him, right? All of you said before, like he's an ani. Of course he can't give tzedakah. But you know what's interesting? This mitzvah that the Rama mentions in both places, what's unique. Well, the reason I wanted to see it in this context is, where does he put it? With the yaseh or with the lav? With the yaseh. I'll explain why in just a second. Look at the next Rambam. That's the lav. Lo saseh reish lamed beis. A mitzvah reish lamed beis. His hiranu, warning us. Shelo limnoa tzedakah v'harchava meo evyonim. Now again, the word limnoa, the verb limnoa, means to abstain or to prevent.
Prevent, yeah.
Right? So, meaning, like we saw in Yala Chazaka, the aseh is about initiating an act of largesse, an act of philanthropy. The lav is about, rejecting, dismissing, or withdrawing, support in the context where it's already expected, or at least where there's already a bond or an encounter between the parties. So that's what the words mean. Limnoa, shalo limnoa, tzedakah v'harchava me'avyonim. Don't prevent it. Don't be an obstacle to it. What do you mean be an obstacle? It doesn't say, if you don't do it, you're violating the law.
But that's part of
one more second. Just one more second, I'll take the question. The next word is the key word. Me'achenu. What does that mean?
Our brethren.
Isn't it interesting that when the Rambam speaks about the los aseh, he speaks about achenu. But when he spoke about the aseh, he quoted the pasuk of v'echzakta bo ger v'toshav v'chayimach. Meaning, it sounds like the mitzvah aseh, if you send a check to a ger toshav, that's also good. But it sounds like the lav applies only when you withdraw support or deny support in a more active way from achicha, your brother. Once you know his needs, the yicholtenu, that's also key, and you have the ability to help him. Of course, if you're not in a position to help him. So, for example, would an ani violate a lav if he couldn't help his fellow ani? No, he doesn't have yicholtenu lahachzik b'hem. Right? Not only that, bezaz harami liknos midas akilus v'achzarius, says the Rambam. Very interesting. This, this prohibition to withdraw support or to reject support, is a function of cultivating. You have to make sure that you don't become an achsari, a cruel, an inhumane person, right? Shetimana ma'asosa ra'oi. Declining, or maybe declining isn't strong enough, right? From abstaining from doing what's proper. So what's interesting is two things. the obligation of one ani to at least pro forma fulfill the mitzvah of tzedakah to another ani is only under the rubric of the mitzvah saseh.
Mm-hmm.
Right? The extension of tzedakah recipients to include ger toshav, minat Torah, is only under the mitzvah saseh. The mitzvah lo saseh sounds like there already is a bond and an encounter or something the equivalent of that, and it's more like you are, refusing to do what you're supposed to do, not that you're not initiating.
Mm-hmm.
It's only applicable to achicha, and it seems like it doesn't apply to other aniyim. Why is that? I think the answer is, and maybe this is true for Balei Tosas as well, that the positive commandment is about, initiating philanthropy. It's about being altruistic. It's about complying with the mitzvah of the Torah to be generous. It's like other mitzvahs say, it's to satisfy the Rabbanu Shalom. Of course, it accomplishes something, but there's no specific, you have to find an address in a way. You can even send it to a ger tosha. No one's making demands on you, except for the Rabbanu Shalom. But what I mean is there is no ani, that we're not talking about anybody, specific in halacha aleph or in mitzvahs aseh kuf tzadi hey. We're talking about your obligation, like you have to go and buy the daled minim to fulfill the mitzvah, and you have to go and build a sukkah, and you have to make sure that there's a shofar, so you can fulfill that mitzvah, right? And you have to, also make sure to take care of your biblical obligation to be philanthropic. And where do you send the money to? Of course, to a shul, to a mikvah, to an ani, to a Jewish ani, to a ger toshav ani, right? Then there's something quite different, and that is, when one Jew, right, is in need, and he confronts you, and you're already connected to him, so then withdrawing support or refusing, his personal plea, pretending you don't hear it, that's a different story. There, it's like the Ra'ah and the Radvaz. He's making a demand on you, but that can only be Achicha Yisrael. Because this idea that, my hard-earned money, he can demand it of me, right? That can only be among brothers. Even a ger toshav doesn't qualify for that. Ger toshav is a good cause, but it's not a cause that can demand, if you're with me. So I think Balei Tosas were saying when they said, listen, isn't this a mitzvah seishes mat schara b'tzeida? You shouldn't be able to have kviya, coercion. The Tosas says, yeah, but there's a los tase. So most people take it saying, oh, I guess the rule in Chulin that whenever there's a mitzvah seishes mat schara b'tzeida, there's no involvement of the Bezin Shamata. That's only in Asay's, not in Lav, or only if there's one mitzvah, not if there's an Asay and a Lav. News to me. And what do you do with this case and that case? There are all sorts of questions. I don't think that's a pshat in Tosas. I think the idea in Tosas is totally different. What Tosas is saying is, listen, if there was only a mitzvah Asay of tzedakah, we would see it as bein adam lamakom, and we would see it as a chiyuv like other mitzvos, and we would say, if it's a mitzvah seisha matan skar b'tzeida, then ein bezin shalmatum is already allowed. However, there's a lav. Not the just fact that there's a lav. What does that lav imply? It implies that you have an obligation to that ani. You can't just dismiss it. You can't just reject it. It's a monetary obligation at this point. Only to a chenu, not to a ger tosha. But the very fact that there is a lav means that it takes the form of money, and once that is the case, the principle of mitzvah seisha matan skar b'tzeida no longer applies. So this is a very big question in general about tzedakah. Like, is people discuss, is tzedakah about the effect or about the way that you give? Is it about the donor or is it about the recipient? For example,
the recipient is not mekayem any mitzvah.
No, I'm not talking about mekayem mitzvah. I'm talking about, I mean, whether the focus on whether you've fulfilled the mitzvah is defined by what you do or by what he receives. For example, I'll give you a simple example. The Sifrei in Parshas Kiteitzei says the following. Person is walking on the street and money falls out of his pocket.
Mm-hmm.
And Ani picks it up. Okay, the donor doesn't even know he's a donor. The Ani picks up the $100 bill and, he's got food for a week.
Yeah, but the Ribbon
Wait. Is there fulfillment of a mitzvah or not? So the Sifrei says
that he gave up the idea of picking up that $100. So the Ribbon Shalom in his book writes, Moshe Yankel was mekayim the mitzvah of
it's Moshe Yankel's money.
Yeah. So the money went. What's the difference how he gives the money as long as he gives it?
So aren't you taking the view that tzedakah is defined, that in the mitzvah of tzedakah, the effect, the impact is a crucial part?
True.
However, let me give you another example. This Gemara, I don't know if we read it or not yet, but let's go back to page 1 of the old Marmakomos. First, let's do the third entry. The Gemara says, Basra Yud Amid Aleph. Gemara says, Everybody have that?
1 minute, Yud Amud Aleph?
Yud Amid Aleph. There are two Gemaras there, the second entry and the third entry. I'm interested in the third one right now.
Where is it in Yud Amud Aleph? It's quite a big page.
Oh, you have the Gemara open.
The Gemara, yeah, sure.
Yeah, so let me find it in my Gemara. I just have it on the sheet here. But Kihod b'nei Achtia to Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai Chaza b'Chalma. You have that? There, I'll find it for you. I'll give you a play.
How far down is it?
Yeah. It's like let's see. You see the wide lines?
Sure.
Okay, it's a second wide line.
Okay.
And the last words are on the end of the first wide line. Kihad b'nei Achtia de Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai?
Yeah.
Okay. So Chazulahu b'Chalma, the nephews, right, of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. So Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai had a dream about them.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. In the dream, he saw Debo lemichsar shva mea dinri, right? That they are destined to lose 700 dinarim this year.
And that was Motzei Yom Kippur, or what was it?
No, 1 second. So the Gemara says, Asinhu, right? Shako minayu litzdaka. He didn't tell them that he saw this dream, what he saw in the dream, right? Are you okay? It seems like you're disappearing and back and forth there.
Me? I'm sorry.
No. No, not you. One of our chaverim is like disappearing and coming back, and
I don't know.
Yeah. Okay. It's the magic of the internet.
Yeah.
So anyway, listen, he had this dream. He didn't tell them. What did he do? All year he was pressuring them to give tzedakah.
Right.
So pushkabaychu shibsar dinri. Fascinating Gemara. So they gave 700 dinarim of tzedakah minus 17. All right.
But that was in the cholam. That was in the dream.
Wait. He didn't ever tell them the cholam yet.
Ah, okay.
Okay, so listen to this. Kimatam ali yom kippurei. When the Erev Yom Kippur rolled around, so Shadur the Beit Kaisar, the government, the king, sent a messenger to the house of these nephews.
And they took the 17.
Knocked on the door with big brass, knuckles. Erev Yom Kippur. Okay. Naktinu. And they said to him, we want to confiscate 17 dinarim from you.
Right.
They didn't know what hit them, quite literally. Rabbi Yochanan Zakkai was there. He heard about it. He said to them, "Lo titchalun, don't worry about it. If the government came knocking on your door Erev Yom Kippur and said, I'm confiscating 17 dinarim, wouldn't you be scared?" Rabbi Yochanan Zakkai said, "Don't worry."
700 dinar.
Why? Shibsa dinri gabaychu, right? Shaklinu minaychu. You were supposed to lose 17 dinarim. It's no big deal.
And don't worry about it.
Wait, so Omri, so they said to him, Mino yadas, how do you know? Right? So Amar lahu, Chalma chazor lechu. He told them about his dream. And like a year later or whatever, how many months later, he said, I had a dream, you're supposed to lose this amount of money. I encouraged you all year to give tzedakah. You gave minus this amount, and this amount is the amount you were destined to lose. So it's fine. Don't worry about it. It's not like the government, has you on there in their cross hairs. Says the Gemara, Amalei. So they turned to him and they said, V'amai lo amrus Londonus videnu. They said, listen, we would rather give it even the other 17 dinarim to tzedakah than give it to the government. Things haven't changed so much, right? So we'd rather give it as a charitable contribution.
It's tax deductible.
You could have told us, right? So listen to this. Amar lahu, he said to them, why I didn't tell you? Amina ki hechad ta'avdu mitzvah lishma. If I told you, you would have given the whole sum because you knew you were going to lose it anyway, shalom lishma. So I didn't tell you. Now I'm telling you because I don't want you to be scared. But all year when I was pressuring you to give tzedakah and you gave it lishma. So what do you see from here? So the Rabbeinu Bechai Rabbeinu Bechai was a Talmud of the Ramban. As everybody, I think, he wrote a Perush on Torah.
Mm-hmm.
And he also wrote like maybe I don't know if it's the earliest, might have been the earliest halachic or hashkafic, really, kind of both, encyclopedia. It's called the Karakamach.
Mm-hmm.
Anyways, in the Karakamach, he discusses tzedakah, brings also to Mamar Chazal, halachos. And he says, and by the way, there's a preference in tzedakah that it should be given lishma. Right? And the Beis Halevi has a very interesting tshuva in his tshuva, sorry.
How do you define Lishma? Lishma means if I want to have my name on the building, that's not Lishma. What is Lishma? How do you define Lishma?
You gotta stop.
That's a great question.
Andy, if you know the answer, tell me.
There are different levels. There are different levels of Lishma, for sure. But for sure, the more purity of motive there is, the
Matan B'Seisa is the ultimate.
Yeah. Right.
I thought the highest level is if you give and other people give because of you.
Okay. That doesn't make it more lishma, but that's higher level in a different way. There's a din called kol ha'ma'aser, ha'ma'aser, yoser min ha'oser. Yeah, correct. Meaning that somebody who pushes others to give, it's even greater than his own gift. But
it's more difficult. It's more difficult.
Yeah.
You're always facing the possibility of it saying no when you're being embarrassed by the process.
Right. So, but why am I telling you all this? First of all, it's very interesting, right? You say, oh, he puts his name on the building, right. I mean, as you say, that, that gets the job done for sure. And if it also inspires other people, great. And if it's a difference in terms of his, or maybe he wants his name in the building because he wants to, memorialize,
his mother. He wants to give it in memory of his parents. But so,
yeah.
I mean, what,
does
that make it out Lishma?
That's a level of Lishma, probably.
Okay.
But the bigger point I'm trying to make is what the Gemara is saying is, if they knew they were going to lose the money anyway, they gave the money because they figured I'd rather give it to tzedakah than to give it to the government. That's not lishma, right? That doesn't mean it isn't a mitzvah. We told shalom lishma ba lishma, and in some cases there's no lishma. But the Beis Halevi discusses, which is very interesting, is the Beis Halevi not from this Gemara. But in the Tshuvas of the Beis Halevi has drashos. The drashos are very interesting also. So in one of the drashos, he speaks about tzedakah and lishma and tzedakah. He says, is there even a lishma is a concept that applies to mitzvos bein adam lamako, mostly, right? But a mitzvah bein adam lechavero is about the assistance that you deliver. If the guy, if the ani is now able to eat 3 square meals a day or 2 square meals a day, then do we really care whether or not why you gave the money? Well, do we care if you put your name on the building? Do we care, even if he knew he was going to lose the money to the government, so he figured he'll give it to tzedakah? Fine. Is it help the ani less because he, he had some other motivation? At the end of the day, his assistance.
Yeah, he got it done.
He got it done. So that's what the Beis Halevi discusses, or no. So this is the question. In tzedakah, really there are 2 aspects. There is the bein adam lechavero part, the assistance that you give. That's very pragmatic. Meaning, that's why I gave the example. Let's say you're walking in the street and tzedakah falls out of your pocket and the ani picks it up. You don't even know that the money fell out of your pocket. Of course, you still get credit because your money is supporting this ani and alleviating his plight. Is it lishma? No, you don't even. It's not even biyadiyaso, but he still gets credit.
So, but Rabbi,
but there's another aspect of tzedakah, and that is that it's a mitzvah saseh, like other mitzvah saseh. So of course, the more you do it, with proper motivation, the better it is. So this is really a little bit, not exactly, but in the same Gemara and also in our sheets, this is really fascinating exchange between Rabbi Akiva. I'm going to stop after this, and then I'll finish up with this next week, some other aspects of the Kviya part. But Tornis Roplis is called, Harasha. Look on the top of the page on Yud Amud Aleph, or second entry on the first page of the previous Marmakomos. So this is the story. He said to him, Shala She'ela Tornis Roplis Harasha Rabbi Akiva. Right? If you have the Gemaras, it's 9 lines down. So the Tornis Rafus Harasha asked Rabbi Akiva this question: who, if your God loves the poor, why are they poor? Why isn't he taking care of them? Mm-hmm. Right? Amalei, listen to the answer that Rabbi Akiva gave. Kadesha nitzal anu bahen midina shel Gehenna. What does that mean? What it means is, one way to look at tzedakah is the way Tornis Roplis did. It's like an onesh. It's like, it's all about the ani. He deserves it. Maybe he shouldn't go against God's will. He's poor. God could enrich him. Rabbi Akiva said, no, not at all. This is a challenge to us. The challenge of philanthropy is a challenge to the donor to see if he can cultivate, the midah of altruism, and he can rise to that challenge. That's, that's nitzal anu midina shel Gehenna. The Rebbeinu Shalom gave us opportunities to show that we're, b'tzelem Elokim. Listen to the beautiful exchange. So Tornis Roplis didn't give up so easily. He turned to Rabbi Akiva and he said, Adarabba, zusha mechayvasan leGehenna. By supporting the poor, you deserve Gehenna. Why? Because you're going against the will of God. Why? So let's give him a mashal. So the king is angry at one of his servants, and he throws him into the dungeon. Right? But Siva Allah, and then he puts out the word, Shalolachilo, Shalolashkoso, nobody should feed him, nobody should give him drink. One guy, another Eved, goes and he defies the king's order. Bechilo, Vishko, gives him food, gives him drink. Says Tornis Roplis, Kishashama Melech Lo Kohes Alav.
Yeah, but that's
King's,
not.
One second. You mean you want to be on Rabbi Akiva's side over Torah?
So the question is not, it says, Lo yachtal Evion Mikerev. I mean, it's not going against God's wish. God said, I set up the world a certain way.
Better. Rabbi Akiva.
I want you to fix it. Your job is to fix it.
Good. Even better. First of all, you're right. I'm just giving you the two, but you're right. But Rabbi Akiva said even better than that. He says, "Vatem kriyim avodim." This is Tornis Rapus still. Just I'll give you Rabbi Akiva in a second.
So who's telling it? Yeah.
Right? He said to Vatem kriyim avodim. You Klal Yisrael's avodim. Shenemer keli b'nei Yisrael avodim. Amalo Rabbi Akiva. Listen to Rabbi Akiva. He said what you said, but more. What you said is Shenitza lanu b'dina shel Gehenim. It's a challenge to us, right? He said more. Em shel v'chamash shel amad averdom. Says, I have a better mashal. L'melech basar v'dam, a human king, shekos al b'no. He was angry with his son, a loved one. Right? We had to teach him a lesson. He threw him in jail. And one man goes behind the back of the king and he gives the son, the prince, food and drink. Says Rabbi Akiva, Kishashama Hamelech, when the king hears about it, Lo Doron Meshagar Lo. Isn't he going to reward the Eved who had the brains and the Rachmanas to realize that the king doesn't want his son to starve to death? Vanan Kruyin Banim. This is what Rabbi Akiva said. You know, Tarnas Rappas, why you don't understand this? Because you think we're just God's avodim. But we're not. We're his banim. So it's not true that in Elokim Oheva Soaniyim, Lama Eina Mefarnasan. The reason is Kadesha Nitzal Anu Midina Shel Gehenim. Dechsiv Banim Atem Lashem Elokeichem. Right? Then the Gemara concludes very nicely. Omar lo atem kriyim banim ukriyim avadim. Klal Yisrael is always banim. Sometimes they're avadim. Bizman she'atem osem retorn shamakom atem kriyim banim. Bizman she'atem osem retorn shamakom atem kriyim avadim. Achshav ein atem osem retorn shamakom. Omar lo hareu omer halo pros l'ra'av lachmecha v'aniyim merudim tavi bias. Amos ta'aniyim merudim tavi bias. V'yidno v'kamer halo pros. Even when the Rebbeinu Shalom is angry with us, he still wants us to be Mefarnes Eswani. So, but of course, this exchange, just like the Lishma discussion and the discussion of money falling out of the pocket, what they highlight are two perspectives, right? The perspective of, tzedakah is an opportunity for the donor. This is his chance, to rise above petty, materialism, and to do something noble, to deserve, the Rebbeinu Shalom's praise. Litzal lanu midina shel Gehenim, to earn his Tzelem Elokim bona fides, if you will. That's
the only thing that stays with him.
Yeah, that's a big thing. On the other hand, of course there is the issue of the, that's the issue of the nosing. Is there an issue also of the makabel? Of course. There are two dinim. In my opinion, the nosing focuses on the mitzvah saseh. Pasach tiftach, nasan titein. And therefore you got to find somebody you can even give to a ger toshav. Even an ani has to do it, ani chavero, because, doesn't he have to hear shofar in Rosh Hashanah? And sit in a sukkah and do the mitzvah of Daled Midim. He's got to do the mitzvah of tzedakah too. But if you're talking about bein adam l'chaveiro, meaning a chov, like a monetary obligation, that's only to Bnei Yisrael, and that's only to somebody who can afford it. And that's probably only the lo saseh. So that's subject to kfiyah. Okay, we'll stop here. I want to talk next week a little bit about what kfiyah means. What does it mean can you confiscate his property when he's not there? Can you seize his property only b'fanav? even not befun of what is that? I just want to sort of speak about what happens if there's a suffix, a doubt whether you're obligated in tzedakah. Is that like suffix mammon or suffix isar? And a few other issues as we wrap up this little unit on
Shkoch.